age. So I think that's, what makes her particularly appropriate for today's session. So she's worked for outlets like Media24, Arena Holdings, and also she's worked for a number of international publications as well in Hong Kong, Singapore, Bahrain, and Dubai, and all around this kind of digital first approach, moving into the kind of whole digital world. So we're very excited because she's joining us today to share her insights on writing for digital, using data as your guide, and how to respond, very importantly, in an AI world. So over to you, Jess. We're excited to have you, and there will be lots of time for questions. But yeah, over to you, Jess. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kate, and hi, everybody. I thought I'd put my camera on just to start with, and then I'm going to turn it off. I find it distracting while presenting to see myself as well. So, yeah, just to say, I was actually in Kenya last week for a project that I'm working on, and it was, with a lot of big kind of organizations, Microsoft, MasterCard Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and I certainly wasn't as nervous as I am now. There's nothing like being in a room with a bunch of journalists or publishers to hold you accountable. And also, when we were doing the prep work ahead of this, I got some questions. I think it was Kieran that had already sent through some questions, and I'm like, okay, well, let me quickly make sure that everything's right. So I hope that this is a really interactive session, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. So I'm just going to turn off camera now and then share my screen and then get started. Okay, I assume everybody can see it. So, and if we can't, I'm on my screen. So, okay, thanks, Kate.
You can definitely see it. Thanks.
Okay. So as Kate had said, today I have been asked to focus on writing for digital, and really, I think that one of the biggest debates that we know is beyond the click, right? So what I always want to start with is to give an introduction, and who am I anyway, and why am I placed to be in this conversation? And I guess this is a question I've grappled with over the past year. The truth is that up until August last year, the answer was really simple, is that I was a journalist. I've spent most of, even though the previous 5 years of my career had been in the business side of the newsroom at Arena Holdings with publishers, they're publishers of the Sunday Times and Business Day. I was looking after reader revenue, audience development, and data insights. The identity of journalists still felt like home. And then I left a senior management role to explore. And now I do multiple things. I'm the head of digital for a bespoke luxury publication called Your Luxury Africa, which has captured this massive untapped audience with the purely advertising-based model. I lead comms for an impact firm working from everything, with government, digital public infrastructure to vaccination programs and digital livelihoods across 115 countries. And I also do freelance work for international publications like South China Morning Post, based in Hong Kong, Bahrain this month, etc. So I guess over the past year, I've grappled with what it is that I am. And I think that everybody who's been in journalism, what do you call yourself? And I guess for me, I've landed on a simple fundamental truth. And that is that at my core is that no matter the title or I guess the tax return, is that I'm really a content creator. And I work on stuff that resonates with an audience. That gets to the heart of the consumer and the reader. And that's the core message that I hope to share with you all today, is that despite the chaos and the algorithms and the shifting business models, content remains our heartbeat. Obviously, I've been in the trenches. I've led digital transformations at major players like News24, the Sunday Times, and also at smaller international publications. So I know what it's like to build up from zero with a tiny team and an even tinier budget. I know what it's like to see dwindling readers, dwindling consumption, and to go up against behemoths like Google and Meta fighting for a sliver of the attention. And just, as I'm sure you've all experienced, when you think you've got a handle on it and who your reader is, then AI comes into the mix. And I mean, it's a healthy cocktail of shock, and it can feel overwhelming, and it can feel like the ground is shifting beneath your feet. But actually, in the face of all this noise, the fundamentals are our critical advantage. The basics are what are going to make us succeed. And we are left with, I guess, what has always mattered. And what has always mattered is understanding our audience and creating content that truly connects with them, that serves them, and that adds value to their lives. And if we stay on that path of creating brilliant content that resonates, we know that that's our future. So in today's session, I hope that we're going to cover the basics of the craft, how to write and structure content for the digital reader, using data to understand and build your community, and then, of course, the co-pilot that has suddenly probably integrated itself into our workflows is AI, and how to do that ethically. So as I said before, I hope that this is a proactive session. Your questions are welcome throughout. And yeah, because I'm not on the screen, but Kate can just interrupt and say that we've got these kind of questions. So to start with, I think it's important to know, and especially now that I've been out of the 24 news cycle, I used to, up until a year ago, check I think my screen time on my phone was about 10 hours a day. And most of that was spent on news sites. And content fatigue and the kingdom of community are kind of our core themes here. I never experienced content fatigue because I was in it. And now that I'm not as in it as I was, I can say with a fresh perspective that content gets thrown at me at every angle, and it's exhausting. And now that I'm probably a somewhat of a more normal consumer, not someone who has to watch the news, every hour as it breaks, there's a fundamental shift in my own behavior that I've noticed. And that's that I find my tribe and that I stick to it. And this for me is quite a critical insight, because we've all heard that content is king. And I believe that it is. But I also argue that while content is the necessary currency, community is our kingdom as publishers. We know that consumers are gravitating away from generalist sites and towards specific niche tastes that reflect your identity. If you are a generalist site, your user habit, if you explore it, is that people go there for their stuff. So they see it as part of their tribe. It's not very often that you'll find a reader that goes to a generalist site for news and lifestyle and sports. They tend to stick to their tribe. So of course, it's that sense of community that builds a loyal kingdom. And I guess that for me is what's so wonderful and powerful about the AIP publishers, because you are so community focused. You know your tribe, you've never lost that. Whereas at some of the bigger publications, at the Sunday Times, we constantly used to ask, what are you known for? What makes you the Sunday Times? And that answer has changed and blurred and become more complicated over the years. So half your battle as the small publishers that you are is that you know your value proposition. And if you can answer that clearly for your community, you've already won a significant part of that war. So we're all living in this reality. It's not just theory, it's our day-to-day kind of lives. And I guess part of the first interactive part of the session is if you can take out your phones and scan the QR code. And I'm wanting just to kickstart us to understand what's the one major shift in how you've had to create content over the past 2 years. So you're literally going to scan the QR code and then type it in. I hope this works. This is one of the first times that I'm doing this solo. And then let's see what people's answers are and how they say it's affected them. Yeah, of course, AI for sure. I can understand that. Not sure if it's working for everybody. budgets. Yeah, who doesn't know about a budget problem? See, I see people are typing. Numbers. Just give it a bit more time and see. Fewer people, dwindling numbers, enhanced storytelling. And you can give multiple responses. Yeah. I'm surprised that there aren't more people saying AI. But it's so interesting just to see adding multimedia content. So yeah, the AIs. So how this works is the one that's getting the most responses goes bigger and bigger. So that is AI, SEO. I mean, if I think about, yeah, I mean, not even in the past few years how things have changed, but really in the past few months how it keeps on changing. It just, it's a minefield. Okay, I'm going to wait for a few more people to, once they've finished typing. Definitely SEO and identifying keywords. Yeah. Okay, well, I think this is really interesting. Short attention. Yes, I'm going to get to that in my next slide. I see 2 more people are typing, so let's just give them a chance. ChatGPT. I presume ChatGPT, the newer version. Okay, I'll finish off in a bit. I see. Just let's wait for these 2 more people. 1 more participant typing. Writing for revenue. Creating content offerings for advertisers. Yeah, so maybe what we can do is at the end of this section specifically about writing, I'll ask some of you I'll circle back and ask some of you to speak about the way in which it's shifted and how you've created content. But it does particularly resonate with me in creating content offerings for advertisers. It's with the bespoke publication that I do work with, it's such a big part of it. And it's so different to how I'm used to doing things. Okay, cool. So I want to start then with digital writing specifically. And I was thinking about how to summarize this. And essentially, in my opinion, I think that there's 3 main arguments here. There's short versus long, but nothing in between. And I want to speak about specifically at a conference that I went to. And this was, I think, about 10 years ago. But the key points still remain from the data that I have done across various publications. So I was at this conference with some of the biggest names in media: BuzzFeed, Washington Post, Business Insider, Rolling Stone, The Economist, the Financial Times. And it was this fascinating mix of the old guard and the new. And out of all the talks and the debates, there were 2 very clear and opposing messages. The future of content was either very long or very short. So BuzzFeed came onto the stage, and this at that time was at the absolute height of their success. And they made the point to remind everybody in the audience that this wasn't just about cat listicles anymore. That wasn't why they were successful. It was what boosted them into the height of their success. But they had an award-winning newsroom doing serious investigative exposés. Their philosophy was quite ruthless. It was keep it short. It was keep it under 400 words. They were writing for scanners and not scholars. They had this belief that the digital reader is distracted and they're scrolling quickly, and they had to make content digestible. The method, of course, was genius in its clarity. It had lots of headlines, pictures, subheadings. All of that stuff had to do the heavy lifting. There was no flowery intro. The point was clear from the very first sentence. And the article almost has a format. The most important information is first, using bullet points and lots of subheadings. So it was stating the point immediately, and you have to be able to answer, why should I care, in that first sentence, right? That's the front door. Get it in the front door immediately. Structuring your content then, and they really stressed the importance of making your sentence short, making it digestible, having those clear subheadings and those bullet points and lists. So how do you keep a reader engaged if the article itself is short? And they had this philosophy of extending the journey around the content, using more visual elements like videos, infographics, and pushing related articles. So you fill your pieces with strategic hyperlinks and you keep them moving through your ecosystem. And that worked really well for them because they were getting tons of engagement, and they could see that their users flowed onto various articles. They had this rule that in an article there were 5 hyperlinks. That was at a minimum. They had a rule that there were about 3 related articles. It was important for them to have writer profiles, which we know is important for Google SEO. And images and video really, like changed the game for them. So it was a winning data-driven formula, and we see variations of it now everywhere. It's not just the sickles, as I said about cats, but I guess it's a foundation for how we create scannable content in an attention-poor world, and there's a place for it for sure. But that was only half the conference. The other half was advocating for the exact opposite. The other half was saying that if short form is a sprint, then this is a marathon. So you got guys like The Economist, and in some cases the Washington Post, coming up and saying that they believed in long form content. And that was content that was over 1,000 words, that included lots of graphics and visuals. They believed in this philosophy that writing isn't a race, that it's a deliberate choice to prioritize depth over speed, to understand that journalism is a journey for the writer and for the reader. And it's not just about delivering a fact, it's almost like guiding someone through this complex landscape. And I guess this is probably a lot of the journalism that resonates with me, because that's how we all, started. It's a deep dive and not just a soundbite, and it's creating almost something tactile. There is a tactile experience to it. Even on a screen, a truly immersive long-form piece has weight to it. It feels substantial, and it reminds you of the experience of reading a great paper. You're engaged and you're present and you're not just scrolling. So that really resonated with me, because if I think about myself and I'm reading longer articles, it does feel that I've got that paper, and it's not just this quick viral soundbitey news. It makes readers care. So they said that illustrations and graphics are key. These aren't just decorations in the story. They are almost rest stops and viewpoints along this journey. And I saw this, it's something that Sunday Times did quite well, when they used to do more visual pieces and they mapped out locations of places that they had been. I think it was during one of the stories that they did in Mozambique, where they literally mapped out where communities had been lost in the floods. And they had like these kind of pinpoints on a map. They had then, it would switch to a person telling their story. It would be a flip of, like pictures of the floods and the devastation that it had caused. And I think this helps explain complex ideas, and it gives the reader a moment to absorb. You have to break it up and allow the reader the pace to pace themselves. And of course, that still means that you're using subheadings and pull quotes and visual models to kind of create this rhythm. And I think the editor explained it and said, it's almost that we understand that we have to respect the reader's need to pause and think, and you're giving them that control. Whereas with shorter stories, you're not giving them the control. You're throwing it in their face. Bah, 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 bah. This is what you need to know. The ultimate goal for them was that you're occupying the reader's mind. And it's not just for the 3 minutes that they're reading, but for the hours afterwards. And they saw this as key to creating lasting impact and becoming a source that you're thoughtful about, a source that you click on. And the commentary around your related content is vital. So at the end of these deep dives, they would often not throw back onto this chaotic stream of like, you may also like. It was specifically curated. You'd say things like, if this interested you, here is a deeper look at policy behind it. Or read the profile of the person at the center of the story. This kind of extends the intellectual journey of where you started, building on that kingdom of content that we keep talking about, and really worked for them and their numbers. So it was so fascinating to see these two schools of thought going, one short, one long. And if I think about it today and what we faced with, it's still there. I still see the quick sound bites, the quick headline, and then you get the really immersive pieces. The one thing that they were really clear on, and it still resonates with me in the publications that I have worked with, is that there was if you could go long or short, but there was nothing in between. It was the one piece that everybody kind of agreed on in the room, is that you should either be writing 400 words below, quick and fast, or you should be writing 900 words and up. And one editor, kind of suggested that space in between was what he referred to as the dead zone. And he literally illustrated it. And it's one of the key points that has stuck with me over the years is he took out his phone. We know that, I guess there's obviously exceptions, but for most people, the reader is consuming news on their mobile devices. And he took out his phone and he showed how 2 scrolls on your phone is 400 words. And so the reader thinks, okay, that's quick. I got that. I'm done. And it's a complete snack bite experience. They start scrolling and they realize that they're in a 1,200 word deep dive. They realize this is substantial and I need to sit down and focus, and they commit. But if you're in between at 700 words, 600 words, you're almost like in this dead zone. You've asked for commitment, but they're not, but the reader isn't ready to give it. There isn't a payoff of a longer article that is more in depth. And so you've lost your reader. And so I guess for me, when I end off and I say the simple intent of this is like, are you serving a snack or are you serving a feast? But whatever you do, it's that unsatisfying middle that you should probably be aware of. And your strategy for this should be intentional when you're creating that content. So I think I want to stop here and just, if there's anybody that's got any questions, I'm just going to flip to the screen. If anybody's got messages in the chat or want to raise their hand, we can have a look at, taking some questions now.
Yeah, so thanks, Jess. So any questions before we move on? Any thoughts on that? So just one thought from my side. I mean, I think a lot of the articles, just this very interesting idea of dead zone.
Mm.
So yeah, so I mean, I think writing some of these quicker articles, I mean, there's a real skill to it, but it's kind of easier to do it. But also, don't you need a lot of resources to write the longer, thoughtful, pause kind of pieces? I was just thinking about that, what just your thoughts on that? Thanks.
No, I mean, well, I don't, I guess, yeah, yes and no, because it's not about resources. For me, it's about the time. So, as much as the resources, I guess, would come from the visuals and infographics that you would need, but just with your shorter pieces, I mean, you'd also need video and images for that. I think it's more about the time that it takes to put it together. But again, like for me, that's such a anybody who has written a short article and put together those pieces kind of underestimates how much time it does take to put it together. Like putting together a listicle, and whether that's for news or for entertainment, it's like a lot of thought, because it's got to be quick and easy, and quick and easy isn't always quick and easy to produce. Being able to make it digestible, and what's the word, like that you can get it all in one flow, I think for me takes longer to put together, because it's, yeah, for me, getting that snack bite and making sure that it's gets to the point immediately, is much tougher than what it appears to be. If that's, yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
if
Jess,
that
thank
answers
you.
the
I think
question.
I think I think you've certainly got a point there. Great.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mag says, I think it's interesting, never really considered the dead zone element often being led by whether I've just done justice to the story under the circumstances. I agree, and I think that these are things that you only learn kind of, like as you as you go along. I say I went to this conference 10 years ago, and it's one of the things that still sticks with me. And then when I knew it and I started looking at our content, and the way that we, in the various newsrooms, it literally showed this drop off. So I'm going to talk about metrics in the next kind of part. But we would see on our scroll depth, specifically at business day, for example, that it was in tiers, depending on whether you've got the Google paid version or not. But we would see this drop off, like in the first 30% of the story, and you're like, well, like, what is that telling you? And it's telling you that they're not reading the rest. And when we changed our strategy to go really long or go short, we saw those metrics change. And it was so fascinating to know that it wasn't about, so the content was great, but we had to adjust to our reader needs. And the thing is, to also note is that you might have your formula and understand what your reader wants now, but in a month's time, it's entirely possible that it changes, right? So it's a big adjustment to us to go, okay, like normally you would do something, and it's so typical, because kind of like a print splash can go anything from 600 to 800 words typically. And then, if you've worked in a newsroom that does the whole from print to digital, and it's a copy and paste with an adjustment of the headline, you realize that most of the content was in that dead zone. And so we had to make those adjustments across the various newsrooms, to understand that you lose your reader. And so how can we make this shorter so that it is more digestible for them? Or what else can we add? Is there more insight from the journalist or the editor that worked on the story? And yeah, like, and are there other visual elements that we can add to make it longer? So I hope that answers the question. I also, I wanted to say, I realized I'm grateful that you guys all did the poll, because I know it's for journalists, we like the least interactive community. So you guys can feel free to put any other questions in the chat, and I'll answer them as you want, if you don't want to ask a question. Okay, let me go back to the presentation. I had put just an interval here to grab some water, but I'm actually fine. So I think that we can go ahead. One of the keys to understanding your audience is knowing your data. and data is your compass for community building. Just like we've got the ideal word length and writing approach, which is different for each publication, so too is the way that we use data. We know that for a long time, everything was based on the click, right? And I mean, this just goes back to the way that digital kind of first began, and it was a metric that was used for advertisers. Because advertisers wanted to know how many views you're getting. So just like they wanted to know how many copies of a magazine you're selling, what the most important thing was the click. And so publishers became, created clickbait stories because they wanted to get revenue. When measurement tools first came out, we boasted about one thing, and it was about how many active users we had. And it was a big, impressive vanity number. And then publishers had to find ways to actually monetize and understand that user, because the click fluxes all the time. And we realized that the click can be a hollow metric. Of course, with growing restrictions around third-party cookies and the complexity of first-party data, we had to get smarter, and we had to use the metrics to see what we could gather to become our guide. And this, I think, is where a fundamental shift has happened for me, is that the past couple of years, there's been this movement away from the click to engagement. And this is specifically something that I did at Arena before I had left. It was called, I think it's like audience engagement, head of audience engagement. And so they're saying like the kind of catchphrase in the circles are that you're not just trying to attract a crowd, is that you're trying to build a community. You start asking different questions, not just did they click, but how long did they stay? Not just how many page views, but how many pages did they read? And not just how many subscribers, but asking how many of your subscribers actually logged on. And it's these engagement metrics that tell you who your tribe is. The point is that they point towards your most valuable users, the ones who don't just visit and go away, but who belong to your community. It was one of my most important learning lessons when I did a project with the Financial Times a few years ago, is that they kept on saying to me that as important as the data is, as a newsroom, they made a decision to be data informed and not data led. And it's something that I myself used to have deep debates with editors in the newsroom, because we would be in a position where, if you wrote a sexy entertainment story, you would get the clicks. But then you had a really important and investigative story that had exposed, fraudulent activities at a hospital, and people just weren't clicking. And so it became a metric for us also to understand how are people engaging with that content. So sure, you had a sexy entertainment story, they clicked on it and they left. But when you had a more thorough investigative piece, people stayed on the page and they engaged with your content, which is ultimately what we all want as journalists. We want to do the story justice. So some of the key metrics that I look at and that have kind of become in tandem with clicks is time on page. How long are your users staying on your article? So if they're spending 20 seconds on the story, you know that they're not really reading the full piece, and what can you do to change that? The second piece is scroll depth. How far are they scrolling down? We at Business Day at Sunday Times found that our opinion pieces by far had the biggest scroll depth, so as in readers read right to the bottom of the page as opposed to other content. It helped us reposition ourselves and change some of our editorial strategy to focus on including more op-eds, made us realize, and I mean that I think the Reuters journalism reports has just come on about the increased value of influencers and people in newsrooms and in journalism. And we ourselves see that, as I said, it was the op-ed, but we would also see if one of our journalists kind of published a story and put it on their social media pages, the reach was much longer. And because they had their own community, you knew that their community was reading the story fully. The user journey was important for us to understand where the user came in. So if they entered did they see a click to your story on social media and then click on it? And then where did they go? And then what did they do? So that was very important to us. We also wanted to understand returning visitors. This was so important because it does build that sense of community. And as much as we wanted the clicks, more important was the fact that the same people were returning and they weren't just fly-by-nights. And then, of course, engagement rates. Are they engaging with your content? Are they playing the videos that are in your stories? Are they opening up visual packages? I know that some people are attaching kind of PDFs to their content. All of that has just become such an important, all of these are important metrics. I have to say, though, in the past, and I almost feel like I'm disputing everything that I'm saying, but I do believe that it all works together ultimately. In the past year, I know that it has kind of gone back because, of course, we as journalists want to understand what it is that our readers are interested in. And there's the big conundrum of, do you cater to the needs of your audience, or as journalists is your role to expose them to things that they should know about? It's the news that you need to know. So I guess that's always going to be an ethical debate. But there has been this movement to go back to the value of the click, and I almost feel like it's a funnel. So it's for me never to throw or to rubbish the importance of a single user. Of course, you need the single user to be able to get your metric. But that for me is the first step, and then we can go deeper and deeper. So it's the relationship with the user, and the whole thing is important. I see at some of the conferences, publishers have been speaking about what are the points of all these metrics, because sure, you build your kingdom, but ultimately, because of everything else that's happening in the landscape and platforms, specifically in AI and Google and the metrics, you can do all of this, but it might not lead to a lot. And so there's been this return to let's focus on clicks as our starting kind of measure, and from there you can find your path. I believe that they both work together, and you should have everything. But I do believe that in order to build your kingdom, you and your community, all of these metrics are important. Okay. So I'm going to just play this quick video now.
This video will focus on acting on data and connecting the dots. If you observe low scroll depth, investigate where users stop and if there's a trend. For low engagement rates, consider allowing comments or adding clickable links to get your community more invested. If there's no clear user journey, improve related articles and internal linking strategies to keep users engaged.
Okay. So I want to go to the floor quickly because I am interested to know if there are any questions about the data specifically. I don't know if Kieran is on the call, but I will, let me go through everybody else and then maybe just take Kieran's question. I don't know if there's anybody.
It's actually, Jess, it's actually Juan. It's Juan.
Juan.
I can't actually see Juan on the call.
I'm here.
Oh, you are?
Juan, I'm so sorry.
My apologies. Okay. Over to you, Juan.
Thank you so much.
Juan, I'm so sorry. My goodness, what a faux pas.
No, don't relax. Don't worry. No, thank you for the session and thank you so much. This subject is very sensitive to us as community media because the majority of us are not used to these terminologies and these all this stuff. Now, how do we use do you like we have an issue here with the impressions and views and clicks and whatnot. I'm not gonna focus on the question, but I'm just gonna like comment on something.
Yes.
What I've noticed is that if you get more impressions on Google Discover and Google Search and all that stuff, people might not necessarily click your content. It's more like an ad of some sort. But if you get more of those impressions on Google Discover and Google Search and all that, they relate to more clicks to your website. And then more clicks relate to more revenue in a sense, because I remember in May and June, we were able to make at least 50K from Google AdSense. But when Google rolled out the July algorithmic policies and they changed everything, then it sort of like messed up the whole thing. Do you now write for what you are telling us? Must we write for the algorithm or must we write for the people? What about the publisher who writes with the algorithm in mind? Um, but also we have to think about the people that we write for. Please comment on those technicalities.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And I think it's such an important point that you raise. I and my answer isn't a straightforward one, and I don't think that anybody has the answer because you like we know that we're going to make an adjustment, and whatever adjustment you make, these big players that have become so integrated into our lives and our work models, Google, Meta, all the AI tools, have the ability to just change it again. So I feel exactly what you feel. The publications that I do work with have suffered the same kind of conundrum. A reduction in referral traffic, all of those kind of the SERPs that were introduced. I can say that. And for me, this is like it's a tough lesson because how do you do it as a small publisher? And I understand that 100%. About in 2018, I was working at Sunday Times and Business Day, and Meta introduced an algorithm change. About 50% of our traffic on one of the sites, Times Live, was from Meta. Meta changed its philosophy to not focus on publishers and news, but to make it more personal based. Like it was about your community, as in your friends. So you used to get a lot more news in your stream. And overnight, we lost that audience and it never came back. And it taught us such a hard lesson because we sat there and we realized that no matter what we do, we're not going to get that audience back. It was served to these people because of the algorithm. And then Meta changed their strategy. And we made the case that we can't be reliant on these platforms, that we knew that we had to focus on creating content that was more authentic to our community and find other ways to reach our community. But that's also an idealistic view, I realize. And it's kind of like the Google stuff that you're saying now, right? Is like, who do you write for? And it's such an idealistic view because you want to say like I want to write for my community, but also like you are guided by these changes, by these platforms, and figuring out how to adjust to that is navigating a slippery slope that no one can kind of answer. What we came to was this solution, was on the one hand, much of our traffic was still based on, we still received via Meta. It was specifically Facebook at the time. So we realized it was a platform that you can't ignore, just as Google and their changes are things that you can't ignore. But at the same time, we worked towards focusing on creating the longer content, the tail end content. So we knew that it was our content that were the quick hitters, the easy wins that were getting served on Facebook. But our longer, in-depth stories were the ones that were there, but not getting as much attention. So we focused on creating more of that content, and serving that up on different platforms, and experimented with times of publishing to try and make us less reliant. I'm not sure if we got it right. I don't know if that's the answer that you're looking for.
Thank you so much. The thing is that it becomes so addictive when they serve you a lot of traffic, and then all of a sudden, boom, you don't get that. It stops. And it's so depressing. We went from getting over 10 million impressions per month to like down to 70,000 impressions monthly. But now it's improving. It's back to 500,000 now when I check, because we had to go and like crawl all these, scan the Google policies and whatnot, and align our style guide to align with the Google policy so that we don't mess it up. If the bots and the crawlers come to our website to crawl, eventually it worked out because now it's improving all again, and it reflects on the Google AdSense. We activated it again. It's interesting, but it's a topic for another day. Thank you so much for the comment. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know that I didn't answer the question, because the answer is that it's going to change again, and I mean it's so easy for people to say. I remember going to these conferences, and people would say like, you have to learn to test and be agile, and then you're like, sure guys, like, I mean, we barely have capacity to get through a day writing kind of 5 pieces and publishing it and putting it together and making sure that the work that we're publishing is something that we're really proud of. And now you're asking us to change our strategy, whenever it is that you decide to change, and we have to test and be agile. It's tough, and it's, I mean, even here's the thing, that if even the big players are battling with this, if even, like your News 24 and your Sunday Times, and if they're battling, where does that leave room for small publishers? And again, like, I come back to it and say, they're generalist sites, and so they battle with that first kind of part of what it is that they're doing and what their value proposition is. Whereas I think that is where your success is, and finding out how to amplify that, despite all of the changes that these platforms are going to give us, is going to probably be the biggest win and our biggest success story. Interestingly, when I was at one of the talks recently, is that there's this whole theory, that where are websites even going to be in the next 2 or 5 years, and people moving their content away from the sites that measures things like clicks and time on page, and more go and like putting your pieces on Medium or Substack, or like in some cases TikTok, and looking at those kind of metrics that give a more holistic view of your reach and your community. And so I think that there's a small group that I heard about that had a website and realized it really wasn't doing much for them, and so they produce all their content either on TikTok or on Substack, and use those metrics for advertisers. and approach, and have actually got quite a successful model. So I thought that was really interesting. And so what I mean is moving away from the Google metrics specifically. So they're using other metrics to tie it in. And I think that we're gonna, as we kind of go along, wherever it is that your community goes, you'll probably go with. So.
Thank you so much. One last point. We are experimenting with TikTok. We just recently hit 1 million views on TikTok, and it's quite interesting because we do video explainers of the content that we write on the website. Eventually, it's going to move to that, but publishers are going to get tired of websites and that focus on building communities or fan base that's into the stuff that they do or their publications and whatnot. But then the challenge is, how do you monetize that? That's where we have to be creative and find ways of monetizing that. But yeah, that's how it is. Thank you.
Well done on your 1 million. I mean, that's a really impressive number. Kate, I can't remember the name of the team when we were at that FT conference last year. I think it was a team that was either in Kenya or Nigeria, but they were specifically on TikTok as their main medium. And so they were doing these reports on TikTok and how they would get clients adverts. So it was almost like selling like a TV space, like an ad, like a TV space ad, if that makes sense. So they would do the report, and then there would be an edited video in the middle of their report that they obviously got and put in, and then the report would continue. So that's how they monetized it from that perspective. And I mean, their numbers were astounding. It was, I think they also had like a low-key website, but TikTok was their main kind of news source. And it was investigative journalism, it was news, it was politics, and it really did well for them. And I mean, it was like in the millions.
You're so right. I mean, I must actually just check that with Chris Roper then from Code, because you're right, that would be an amazing example. And I mean, if we could actually even get them to come and talk to our sustainability group, it would be absolutely phenomenal. I don't know if they would be prepared to, but yeah, I'd forgotten about that, Jess. But you're right. It was an amazing case study. Yeah, I'll see if I can't find out who they were. Yeah, thanks.
And yeah, I mean, like there's all kinds of nifty ways that these guys are using those kind of platforms to monetize. And I mean, you can't deny it. Like it's, I guess in a way it's kind of using like the influencer model, but for news, right? I mean, just as influencers are being paid to, I don't know, talk about a shampoo or whatever that they're using, it's selling that space. So just as we would sell an ad space in a newspaper or on your website to a page takeover, I think it's that kind of revenue model that people are using, as opposed to AdSense, etc. on Google. Okay, so one of the questions here is, how can one maintain balance between shorter concentration span and longer reading? Well, I think again, I would look at what your readers are pivoting towards, and so there's two answers here for me. Is number one, what are your readers pivoting towards? If they are shorter based articles that you see that are doing better, then you know that that's where the bulk of your effort should go. But again, I think that it's kind of, what is your newsroom philosophy? What is your publishing philosophy? And your kind of ethical ethos would come into play here. And I think that that's such an important consideration. And that's why I like that phrase by the FT. And it's something that I myself very often forget, is that I would very often be data-led and not data-informed. Literally kind of know what stories would do well and focus on those instead of doing the content that you knew mattered more. And I think that one of the things with one of the publications that I do is, look, they do very short stories, and they do those short blasts with lots of pictures, lots of headlines. But as a editorial team, we made a decision to say that 20% of our stories must be long reads, and must have depth and must have more scope to introduce a concept, a complex concept, a topic, and really allow us to feel as if we are doing the story more justice. And that's certainly not to say that a 400-word article can't do a story justice. I think it's harder, as I said before, to write something very short and snappy, because to get all of that information condensed in one is, sure, a big art. But yeah, I think that that's something that you can decide ethically and editorially, what is it that you want your publishing philosophy to be. So Lucas, I hope that that answers your question just on how one can maintain that balance. Yeah, it's interesting with various publications and how they handle it. So I don't know if there's anything else on data specifically that anybody wants to ask. You can put it in the chat or raise your hand. Yeah, I guess just before I get to the next point, is one of the things that I recently like gave an example of to a colleague of mine was the data metrics are there, and as much as they're black and white, there's also lots of gray in between. And sometimes you just don't know the answer. So, and you use the data to help tell the story, but that can always change. So one of the examples that I gave was, I think it was just either after COVID or before COVID. I get, with the timelines, I always get confused between the when the timelines were pre-COVID and post-COVID. But we know certainly at like the bigger newsrooms in the COVID period, there was an uptick of news consumption at first. Suddenly people were at home and they were consuming lots of news. And lots of other lifestyle related stuff. I think we can all remember making banana bread and learning how to make your own pineapple beer. But at the same time, there was a big appetite for topical news and updates, and then it kind of dissipated because we know that there was COVID fatigue. But at one point, we brought it down to, okay, so that was what happened. But at one point, we simply didn't know why our numbers were dwindling. It was really great content. Our metrics showed that nothing had changed in terms of engagement, but we were battling to get the clicks, and when we did get the clicks, they were bouncing quite quickly. And so while we were putting this all together, it really just came to the simple fact when we sat there one day around the room and realized that there had been these rolling blackouts. And so it was really load shedding that had affected our numbers over an extended period. And it was this external factor while we were all sitting with these numbers trying to decipher, had our content changed? Was it just not resonating anymore? What did we need to do to pivot? And actually, it was Eskom that had really changed our whole strategy. And so I guess like for my message, for me, it was sometimes the answers are external. And I think that you can use these metrics as a guide, but always look towards external factors as well. Is there something else happening in your area, in your neighborhood, with your community that you're not aware of, that's affecting your numbers? And use that as your guide as well. Okay, so we're kind of in the last part of this, and then I hope to open the floor a lot more. And I think that this is such a big topic for us, not just around the world, but specifically in newsroom, and how it's affecting publishers, not just from a numbers perspective, but also just in our workflows. So I guess I'm going to do another poll now, and so if you can take out your phones scan the QR code? And do you use AI in your daily workflow? And this is always just such an interesting metric for me, to see, how many people are using it or are still avoidance. I was somewhat using it, and now, I use it daily. So I'm interested to see from the people on this call. Okay, we've got 100% at yes so far in your daily workflow. And when I say daily workflow, I guess, I'm talking about like publishing specifically, not if you're using ChatGPT to do your exercise workout or think of recipes. I see more yeses coming through, so 100%. This is really great to see because, and again, like for me, it illustrates the power of small independent publishers, because I can tell you that at some of the big publishers that there are lots of no's here. So I see there's a lot more people taking part in the poll on my side, so let's just wait for everybody to respond. Yeah, it's very encouraging to see no no's. Okay, I'm just waiting. There's 2 more people that have logged on. Scan it. No. Okay, well, there you go. Okay, let's just wait for, I see there's, just on, I can see on my side that there's a bit 2 more people. Let's give them a chance.
Jess, I can see Juan's hand up.
Okay.
Thank you, Kate. While we are waiting, I just wanted to hear Jess's opinion on this. When do you disclose, or what is the best use of disclosing the use of AI?
So in what context?
Generally, if your newsroom uses AI, when do you disclose? Definitely, let's say, for example, I'll take one of our video explainers on TikTok. We cloned one of our journalists. So when it reads the news, the character, which is one of our colleagues, where we use him even if he's not at work. We haven't found a way of putting a disclaimer or like AI disclosure that, oh, this one is AI enhanced, though we know that it's him. That's why we're struggling. Like, how do we put it on the caption or do we put it on the video?
Yeah.
And then the other use would be if you proofreading was done with AI. Of course, the journalist will write, and then an article, for example, and then you proofread and polish the article, maybe using AI. Then how do you disclose these things? Because you have to ethically disclose. I just wanted to hear your opinion on that while we're on the subject of AI.
It's such a nuanced answer, because every newsroom and kind of publisher will have its own school of thought and editorial policy that guides this. And Kate, I think I don't actually know if the Ombud has updated any kind of regulation around this. I'll say, in my opinion, that sorry, Kate, do you wanna?
No, I just wanted to say that, and I mean, actually, you're making me think I need to check, the press council again, but they certainly did have an AI policy in place. I'm sure there are other people that might know more than I do, but I saw one which was drafted about a year ago. But colleagues, do you know?
Yeah, I actually haven't seen that, so I don't know.
If there is, please share, Kate.
Yeah, that would be great.
We'll do, definitely.
Yeah. So my answer to this is like you have to disclose. I mean, you have to be completely transparent. It's just the way in which you do it. And I know that there are two kind of schools of thought on this. The first is to treat it as if you're treating a collab or a native article. And that is to put it upfront and clear from the start. So if you've got an article, let's say, we know that the press code says that it's got to be made clear from the start that this is a paid for content. And so you have that strip that says collaboration or sponsored. And so that's clear that this has been paid for. So it would be something, I mean, there was talks of like wording like AI generated or AI edited, a strip that makes it clear, and then a kind of disclaimer upfront saying this article was edited using AI. But then, you know, edited means different things for different people. Some people are using it just to check for grammar and spelling, but not to polish. And other people are using it for grammar, spelling, and to polish. And so there was debate around the specific wording of that, and what would be acceptable, which I presume, you know, would be in this kind of guide that Mags has just put in the chat here. So I would go, I'm on the side of the fence that says put it up front so that it's clear from the start. And other people argue that it's you can mention it at the bottom of the page. You know, at the bottom of a story. So you've written the story and you're putting it at the bottom. In the case of your video, I guess, you know, I don't know if the Press Council Code kind of illustrates that, but I would certainly, like for me, the principles would apply, whether to put it up front or at the end. I mean, we know that it's got to be there. So I would almost have a slide immediately going like, you know, this is an AI generated copy of our journalist, so that it's there from the start. That's my view. I don't know if other people want to weigh in, because I find this so fascinating, because like you say, it's a replica of your journalist, but how do you disclose it? So I don't know if anybody knows offhand.
We've actually got Mahmoud Sanglia, who is our representative from AIP from the Press Council. So yeah, Mahmoud, please go ahead.
Hello, Kate, and thank you, Jess. Yes, the Press Council does have what it calls a guidance note. It's not policy as such, and it's not binding. I just posted the link to the guidance note on the Press Council website. But the points that you've just raised earlier as to how to go about it, those are all perfectly reasonable actions that publications can take. Like the moment you know that AI had a fundamental role to play in a piece of content that is produced, then that disclosure would be, I'm not sure what's the word to use. I can't say required, because like I said, it's certainly not policy yet. And I think that is still in development, but it would be advised. Perhaps that's a better word to say. It's advised to make that disclosure. And I think that's kind of the broad answer to all Kwan's questions as well. Because if you have an AI assisted voice replica of one of your journalists, I think it would be reasonable to make that disclosure. And I do think that the journalist and the publisher, like Kwan and the journalist, would need to confer on what would be the appropriate way of making that disclosure. So there are multiple ways of doing it, but because this is such a new space of innovation in media and in journalism, it is in development. It is constantly under monitoring, and the policy that's going to come out of it, is something that is still they're still busy with it, so it's still in development, and we haven't seen anything concrete yet as far as either a South African policy on AI or an international one.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Thank you for explaining that. There was such a big debate on one of the groups that I'm on, because people had said if you were going to use AI just to edit for spelling and grammar, why should you put a disclaimer? Because when you're writing an article, you don't say I used Word to like spell check. So it was so tough, because I guess obviously we know it depends on how you prompt it, but I thought it was a valid argument. I mean, like on some of the CMS systems that we use, like whatever platform it is that you're using, there's an inbuilt tool. So for example, at Arena they had something called Tanza that was a spell check on the CMS system. And one of the subs raised this point and said, but, like, we don't put a disclaimer saying Tanza did a spell check and, told us that this comma was in the wrong place. So I guess that was just a small nuance for me. Sorry, Mahmoud, I see your hand is up again.
Yes. So, I think the important thing for a publisher to ask, at least this is the kind of question I ask in our own newsroom, is what difference does AI make in terms of the actual workflow and the impact on human resources in your newsroom? And so to give an example, earlier this week, I conducted a workshop with our staff. Basically, it's our editor and our two admin people, but it could have included, the freelance journalists and so forth as well. So what we've done is, because our editor spends a great deal of time sub-editing content, so we get content coming in, and if it's a freelancer or a journalist that is hired on a more regular basis, they tend to make the typical mistakes when it comes to formatting and spacing and the writing of the headlines and so forth. So, but we do have a template. We provide them with a very detailed style sheet, a style guide, and very often they miss it. So what we've done is now, in the workshop, I've uploaded the style guide as a document on AI, and I've given AI the instruction that it's another document, which is the actual article, the raw article that is not yet edited. And I've asked AI, use the style guide and apply all the rules relevant to this particular piece of writing. And it gave us the response. And the editor was quite astonished. It really reduced his workload by at least 90%. So in normal circumstances, if we had a sub-editor who would do that work, he'd be paid for it, but we wouldn't need to disclose it when we publish the article, because that's a real person who's hired to do a real job. Now, the question arises, now that you're publishing and using AI to do exactly the same thing, why the need to make that disclosure? Because you would have used a real person to do it in any case. You're just using a tool because that just makes your job a lot easier, makes your production a lot faster, and it makes it a lot cheaper. Would those be the reasons for you to make that disclosure? Because if you had to make that disclosure when you're using AI, why not make that disclosure when you're using a real person? So this is the kind of things that we're grappling with right now. And I think the policy of the Press Council or other international policies will obviously come in to assist and to guide us further.
Yeah, I think those are all relevant points, and I think I see a lot of people in the chat putting in examples of other guidelines that have been distributed. I see the BBC's here from Fred, and from the Henry Malo Foundation. Okay, I mean, I think we've probably addressed so much of what I was going to speak about. I guess for me is, we know it's this, it's here and you can't ignore it. The human AI partnership, and you just brilliantly illustrated how it's being used in newsrooms and how to use it to your advantage in a way that is ethical and transparent. I think that we know that those are kind of like the most important factors here. So some of the ways that what I wanted to do in this section of the talk was maybe, and if other people can jump in, just talk about ways that we are using it in newsrooms and in our general workflows, and just to give examples of how different publics have also reacted to this. So brainstorming headlines and angles, summarizing complex reports, I think it's important here to know that, to use large language models that don't hallucinate. Notebook LM is certainly one of the ones that stands out for me. And then, in terms of this partnership, repurposing content for different platforms, I think that that's key here, is, taking that a story and summarizing it for LinkedIn or for social media. That's where AI has been most useful. But of course, we know that there are these non-negotiables for AI use in the newsroom, and that number one, and I know that somebody put this in the chat, is that human overlay is the most critical. That you have to be able to still fact check, still look at a piece for nuance, for voice, and for ethical judgment. And we know that AI doesn't have a moral compass, and human overlay is so critical because we do. That there has to be accountability, that as publishers, we are ultimately responsible for the content that is being put out. I myself slipped up with something the other day that I was doing. I did a report and I had written the whole thing and I had used AI just to check for spelling and grammar. And I had included somebody's email address as a point of call at the end of the message. And it changed the person's name. I think it was like Samantha Adia, and it changed it to Samantha Smith for some reason. And it was so bizarre because it was, number one, not the instruction that I had given it. And I just presumed that it had followed my instruction. And I mean, luckily I caught it kind of before there was any kind of publishing, but it brought me down to number one, you have to fact check everything that goes out. And then ultimately, as the publisher, I'm responsible for any kind of content that it pushes out. And then, of course, transparency, which we've just discussed, is leaning towards transparency builds that trust. If you disclose it immediately, that is something that your readers are going to ask. We all know that they're asking these questions anyway. I see so many content pieces now where people say, like, was this AI generated? And I think that people are making so many, I mean, it's evident, right? I mean, we've heard those people that are, well, we've seen the kind of LinkedIn posts, the person can't write. It could be like when I say, they're on the kind of business side and suddenly they're writing like these complex theories that are being posted on LinkedIn. So I think that once you've got that human overlay and you are authentic and transparent, we can eliminate a lot of that. So I wanted to now just use two of the biggest examples that I've experienced so far in a publishing space of how AI is being used to its, in a newsroom. So the first is one with an international publication. So essentially, they downsized their newsroom. They had to cut costs, and so the way they structured their workflow was, and obviously, I mean, it's not wrong or right, and there's a lot of implications that come with this, was that they had kept a bunch of junior staff on board. The junior staff wrote a first version of a story. Instead of that going up the line of senior editor, it went to AI to edit. It then went back to the junior editor, the junior writer, to say whether they were happy with the version or not. And then it went to a sub-editor, and then it was published. In the newsrooms that I've worked in, that's kind of eliminated two roles and two steps. It's not to say, again, I mean, there's lots of debate for it about this and whether it's wrong or right. It's just, it was interesting to see how it had changed the workflow of that newsroom in particular. And the second one, probably Mahmoud, maybe similar to the example that you had given, but specifically using some of the Google tools, was that I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with Gemini and the gems that you create, but essentially you create, let's say it's something called Jessica's Voice, and I'm the editor of a publication, and I went and copied a bunch of editorials that I had written, a bunch of op-eds that I had written. I took the transcripts of meetings that I have been in, and I entered into what it's called a knowledge base. So I've created this gem called Jessica's Voice, and my knowledge base now consists of my previous op-eds, my previous transcripts of meetings. And so it's reading, it's getting a sense of who I am, my tone, my style. And there are two ways in which you can then use this gem. First is you can enter it into a few notes, and you can say, I want to write an opinion piece about, I don't know, the state of the roads in my community, and the potholes, and how the municipality isn't fixing it, but the community has gathered. And using your previous tone and style of writing, it would put together a piece. And the second way is that you would write it very rough, and then it completely polishes that piece. I lean towards, because I think, again, this can be an ethical debate. I lean towards the second version of this because, I just think that there's so much that can go wrong if you rely on the tool to write it completely. But I think that this was a resounding success for the team that implemented this. But again, ultimately that meant that the editor wasn't writing their own op-eds. The editor was putting something together and prompting the tool to write the op-ed. It was disclosed, but I just thought it was such a fascinating use case of giving the tool all of the information it needed, and then it writing the op-ed, which again, I mean, it puts us in that situation of like, are writers easily replaceable? And my answer is no. I think that writing and journalism has become more critical than ever before. In the whole life cycle of content creation, we are the human overlay. We are the final say in all of this. And it goes back to my first point of content remains king, and we need to build our community. And we're only going to build our community through authentic communication, pieces that do our community justice. And while we cater to their needs, we also use an ethical compass to ensure that we're giving our community the news that they need to know. And I think that while AI can certainly streamline processes, I use it daily. I'm an advocate for it. We shouldn't forget that our part in this is more critical than ever before, and that that I don't think that we are replaceable, is that we are the human overlay in all of this content. So before we go to kind of the last part of this, I just wanted to open the floor. I'm interested to know how people are using it in their work streams, or if there's been other examples. But I thought that the gem specifically was a fascinating case, and posed many ethical questions and dilemmas. And while I saw, I understood the need for it, I would certainly, like I say, giving a rough draft, asking someone to polish something is one kind of aspect with it. I know that people are using it a lot for newsletters and newsletter generation. So that's also something I think that's worthwhile discussing, is that like that kind of more generic communication would be where it can play a big part in reducing workloads. If anybody wants to raise their hand or put a question in the chat. At all. Mahmoud, have you got any more examples from your side?
Sorry, examples of what in particular?
Just the use of AI in newsrooms.
Yeah, look, we use it at multiple levels. Perhaps another interesting example is in the production process. we very often attend news conferences or events where a video or an audio recording is obtained, and then we have to produce a content. I remember in the good old days, I used to sit for hours and sometimes days on end doing a transcript. Now it's a matter of uploading a audio or take a video and then first convert it into an audio. That takes a few minutes. And once you've produced a transcript, you get AI to clean it up. I've reported on an entire 2-day conference using the tool, and although it involved a great deal of real input from myself, where I had to tell the tool this is correct, that's not correct, and you will need to expand on this presentation and so forth. It was intensely interactive, but it really reduced the workload and the time taken to report on this conference very, very significantly. So, so the actual work done is to do with the production of transcripts, and then the cleaning up of the transcript so that your speaker labels are clearly identified. Your formatting by paragraphing and so forth is done by AI. And then if you want to do an actual report on who said what, AI can do that. And going even further, if you want to do an analysis of who said what compared to what the next person said, AI can do that too. So all of this is kind of ways in which to report on a conference, but it does require a fair amount of work in preparing the content and uploading the prompts. I think the prompt writing experience and exercise is rather important, because that requires a certain amount of skill where you've got to know what you want. But apart from knowing what you want, you need to know what you don't want. So you've got to design your parameters for your prompt very clearly to the AI tool. You're speaking to a bot. You're speaking to, as Des Latham used to tell us, you must imagine your AI tool is an intern. You're giving instructions to an intern. And when that content is produced, it still requires very, very careful human oversight, because invariably the bot makes mistakes and you must take responsibility and accountability for it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a valid point. Okay, well, we're at the end, and what I wanted to do for this last bit was just open the floor if anybody has questions for me specifically about any of the points that I have raised or some of the examples that I've given. I'm here to answer your questions to the best of my ability. While I was doing this presentation, I was laughing because I thought, you're going to go into this, but the beauty of the AIP publishers is that you are way more advanced in the use of these tools and your thinking than some of the big publishers. It's one of the things that they battle with the most, is making those kind of adaptations to new technology. I mean, one of the kind of main media houses in this country has barred the use of AI in its newsroom, and has said you can use it for a headline and that is it. And he's busy and is in the process of creating, internal policy around that. And I mean, that's also just a whole different take on it, because how do you stop it? So I think that as AIP publishers, you're in such a great position, because you really are nimble and able to adapt much easier. And as I say, your biggest strength is that you know your community. It's just battling the behemoths at scale like the other newsrooms do, the Googles and the Metas. But if anybody's got any questions, I think now's your time to answer. And then I've just got one last slide. And Kate.
I'm putting my hand up. So one of the things which I think is really interesting is just the number of different AI tools that you can potentially use. And sometimes in that way, it's actually a little overwhelming. So I use ChatGPT, but I'm sure it's not actually the best one to use for journalism. And I know that people have said to me that kind of things like Grammarly, in fact, are like really great. And as you say, like you're talking about gems, all sorts of different interesting ones. Do you have any kind of comment around, particular AI programs that you would use for particular things? So, this one for more like short video, this one for kind of images. Yeah, it'd be lovely to just get your sense around that, Jess. Thanks.
So Kate, I was actually going to make this comment to you and say, I know that you had a session about AI at some point this year, and I was actually sad to miss it. And I don't know if that session covered the use of tools specifically. But I do think that it would be such a worthwhile session to have with the publishers about what tools they use and how. It's so fascinating to have, like different use case examples of how people are using things. I know Juan made the joke earlier about co-pilots. And it was funny because I put, is AI your co-pilot, and then realized, oh yes, there is of course the tool co-pilot. So I think it depends on what you're working on. Look, I work on the Google Suite a lot, so I find, and that's just because it's been indoctrinated into my kind of work habits. It's not to say that it's better than any of the other tools out there, but I just find it easier for my own kind of processing to keep everything in one kind of system. So I don't personally use ChatGPT. I use Gemini, and I validate against another tool, DeepSeek, in terms of checking. I use it a lot for editing purposes, so not so much for writing, but I use it a lot for editing purposes. In terms of like summarizing large volumes of information and documents, I found that Notebook LM is spectacular. It's like one of my go-to kind of things that I will input that data into. And then I think that in terms of transcripts, it was, Mahmoud, I don't know what tool you use. I don't have a lot of that, like using, inserting audio and then making it go into a transcript. And I think that one of the ones that I have used in the past was Otter. But yeah, Kate, in terms of like video, again, there are all of these things on the Google Suite. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask, just because I feel like I'm kind of indoctrinated into that system. And it's not to say that it's better, it's just because that's my workflow. I feel like everything that I do is kind of on Meets and on Google Docs and on Google Slides, etc. So so there's a thing called Vids on Google that I use. So that's what I do for a lot of video editing. The Slido, which is what I did all of these polls and the word kind of clouds on, that's really cool for presentations and team meetings. So Slido is great for that. Vids I use, and then I use Gemini and then validate with DeepSeek. So that's my kind of main pool on a daily basis. But I'd be interested to hear from anybody else. It's so interesting when you hear these things. I attended a 12-week AI training session, and despite everything that was said, and it was a lot because I actually felt more overwhelmed by all of it than anything. It was more hearing from firsthand from people what tools they were using and how they were using it. And I literally took those nuggets and then started implementing it into my kind of, into the work that I do. So, and that's how I came to be into the whole Google world. So I don't know if anybody else has got other examples, but it would be definitely for me a worthwhile session to have.
So Jess, absolutely. So I mean, we have had like various AI sessions, and as you're saying, people have sort of referred to particular kind of programs, um, but I think that actually to have a session where we actually do discuss all the different programs and their particular kind of benefits and strong points could actually be very helpful. And I'm also thinking potentially, I mean, you'd have to constantly update this, but to even have a document, that says, for these kinds of processes, these kinds of AI tools would be, would be particularly helpful. So yeah, so I am, if everybody's interested, I'm very happy to see if I can set that up. So thanks, Jess. Thanks.
Yeah. No, I think that would be useful, almost, yeah, like our just tools for use. That would be interesting. I saw somebody ask this question and I actually think it was Marianne from Google who put this question on, and it was her that said, notebook LM was her kind of biggest thing for deciphering complex data and putting PDFs in from presentations, etc. And I was like, okay, well, if the lady from Google is saying that let me go and use it. And that's how I got into it. And I've never been, I get a lot of PDF documents with like 30-page, 60-page presentations, and it has been most helpful because the hallucination isn't there, of course. So yeah, that's kind of critical. So what I wanted to end off with this session is to say, I hope you found it useful. I said to Kate that my biggest frustration when I was first kind of starting out or led a very small team was that a lot of people would come and have these great ideas and these sessions and then disappear. And Kate has asked me if I would be happy to start a WhatsApp group or be part of a cohort of sorts. I know there is the WhatsApp, the AIP WhatsApp group that I'm on, but just if there's anybody in particular that wants to reach out to me, or like discuss anything that we've gone through here, or have want guidance on how to write for digital. I certainly don't know all the answers. I think I've got a good handle on things, and I can guide you as I know best. But I'm sure you've all got a lot to teach me. But yes, I want to make myself available, so we can have a WhatsApp group, or you can take my number privately and you can reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. My fiercest friends started off as my mentors, and just being able to lean on somebody who's got a little bit more experience, or just to be able to have a conversation and bounce ideas off of each other is just so pivotal. And yeah, just to say that I'm very grateful for this group, and I think that you guys are doing wonderful things, and I know that it's tough. It's a tough landscape. I always think to myself, Flip, if I was at News 24 and Arena and we thought things were tough, being an independent publisher is tough, and I do work for one of the independent publishers. But I hope that you know that you've won so much of the battle in knowing who your reader is, and being able to capitalize on here with the content tricks, with the data, and then using AI to benefit you. I hope will stand you in good stead. So yeah, that's it. That's
Thanks,
the
Jess.
end of it from me. I feel like I've done a lot of speaking. I felt like there was going to be a bit more questions, but then again, yeah, I say like journalists are the ones that will send me a message afterwards or an email afterwards. I'm also that person, so I understand.
So colleagues, what I wanted to say is exactly just to kind of reiterate what Jess has said. And it was just a conversation that Jess and I had when we were talking about this session, and we were saying, we have all these amazing sessions, but often what happens is that, we don't necessarily kind of implement a whole lot of things because we're busy, and we continue with all our work, etc. So that was why, and we just wanted to put it forward as a proposal, and if it works, perfect. If it doesn't, no worries at all. But this kind of idea of people reaching out to Jess and potentially maybe setting up a kind of WhatsApp group just for a week or two to if you're wanting to experiment with some stuff, you're wanting to work on some of the ideas that Jess has put forward, Jess has said that she is prepared to, put time aside to be able to help and answer questions, and would love to hear about things that you might be experimenting with. So just an idea. I mean, Jess, your number is actually on the sustainability group, which is amazing. We'll also put, if that's okay with you, Jess, we'll put your number on our other AIP provincial WhatsApp groups, and just saying to people, please watch this video again because we've recorded this. If you're interested, reach out to Jess, ask her some questions, and of course, if you want to, watch this recording again. But thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for the interaction. And yeah, take care. We'll see each other soon. All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.